I found 5 condoms in my husband's car. Not one, not two, but 5, pressed together in a small pocket on the driver's side, as if he thought he could tuck away his secrets with the loose change and the old gas receipts. The sight of them froze me harder than any winter wind, because I knew what they meant, and I knew they were not mine. At first, I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. I just sat there with my hand hovering like it had touched fire. There is something different about seeing proof with your own eyes, something that takes every quiet fear you have tried to push away and paints it in bold red letters right in front of you. 5 condoms. It didn't scream mistake. It whispered routine. It meant planning, preparing, repeating, and suddenly I was no longer standing on solid ground. I was falling through my own marriage like the floor had given way beneath me. My name is Lily Carter. I am 25 years old, and I believed I was the kind of woman who had built a safe and ordinary life. I thought marriage was Sunday groceries, shared laughter over reruns, whispered talks about someday having children. I thought my husband Mark Bennett was my partner, my safety, the man who promised forever with a steady hand and a smile that once made my heart skip. I never imagined that forever could carry secrets stuffed into a pocket, hidden in plain sight where only luck would uncover them. That moment in the car stripped away something tender inside me. I wasn't angry yet, not really, because anger is hot and sharp, and I was cold, hollow, like someone had scooped me out with a spoon and left only a shell. But the strange thing is, in that emptiness, a spark lit up. Instead of crying, instead of running to him demanding answers, I did something I never expected of myself. I placed them back, carefully, exactly where I had found them, and I decided to wait. I thought about my grandmother's voice, the way she always said a calm woman can break a house faster than a storm, because storms are loud and pass quickly, but silence unsettles, silence lingers. I thought about how many times I had brushed off my instincts, how often I had let him tell me I was sensitive, dramatic, imagining things. Not this time. This time I would hold my silence like a weapon. I would not scream, not yet. I would prepare. And if you're listening right now, I want you to know this is the hardest part of the story to tell, because it is the part where hope still lived in me and trust still had a chance. When I found those condoms, it was the moment my world cracked, but it was also the moment I realized I was not powerless. Your support, the fact that you are here, listening, means more than I can ever say. When you tap like, when you leave a comment, it reminds me that I am not alone, that every woman who has felt her knees buckle under betrayal has a voice that deserves to be heard. So if you've ever felt the floor drop out beneath you, let me know. It keeps me strong enough to keep sharing the truth, no matter how much it hurts. The strangest thing about betrayal is how it makes you replay the past in slow motion, as if all the little moments were clues that you should have seen but somehow didn't. After I found those condoms, my mind went racing back through every time he brushed off my questions, every unexplained late night, every faint smell on his shirt that wasn't my perfume. It was like someone had handed me a puzzle with missing pieces, and suddenly the condoms filled the empty spaces. I remembered birthdays where his gift was an afterthought, the nights when he turned over quickly with a mumbled excuse about being tired, the weekends he said he had to catch up on work, while I sat home waiting for a text that came hours later. At the time, I told myself all marriages had ups and downs, that I was being too sensitive. But now those excuses felt cheap and thin, like tissue paper stretched over a lie. Mark had a way of making me feel small without ever raising his voice. He would laugh when I asked where he had been, call me dramatic if I pressed, and then kiss my forehead like I was a child he needed to calm. He loved the word sensitive. He used it like a leash, pulling me back every time I tried to stand taller, and I believed him because I wanted to. I thought love meant forgiving little hurts and letting things slide, even when my stomach twisted at the silence between us. Now, holding the memory of those 5 condoms like a knife, I realized how many times I had silenced myself for the sake of peace. I began to see our marriage not as the safe place I thought it was, but as a stage where I was playing the part he needed, the sweet wife who smiled in public and stayed quiet in private. I started noticing things I had ignored before, the way his phone was always flipped face down on the table, the way he took it into the bathroom like it was a piece of himself he couldn't leave behind, the way he dressed a little sharper when he said he had late meetings, how he added cologne he never wore for me. I caught glimpses of text notifications that vanished too quickly, and I told myself not to be the paranoid wife. But the truth is, those 5 condoms had already poisoned my peace. Every gesture looked different now. Every laugh that wasn't shared with me felt like it belonged to someone else. I felt myself shrinking inside, like a balloon losing air, trying to act normal while my insides screamed that nothing was normal anymore. And yet, I stayed silent. I didn't ask questions, didn't slam doors, didn't let him see the storm building in me. I let him believe I was still the girl who smiled when he told half-truths and nodded when he dismissed my fears. But inside, something was shifting. I was no longer the weak link in our marriage, no longer the child he could pat on the head with that word, sensitive. I was a woman with a secret now, the secret of what I had found, and the secret of what I was planning. If he could keep secrets, so could I, and mine would be sharper than his. The days that followed were like living in a house where the lights kept flickering, where you could never quite trust what you saw. Every detail that once seemed ordinary now carried a sting. Every movement of my husband felt like it carried a secret weight. Mark began coming home later and later, sometimes brushing me off with a half-hearted story about traffic or a sudden meeting, other times offering no excuse at all, just a shrug as he headed straight for the shower. That shower became his shield. The sound of running water meant he didn't have to speak to me, didn't have to explain why his shirt smelled faintly of perfume that wasn't mine, didn't have to meet my eyes. I started noticing how much longer those showers lasted too, as though he thought time could rinse him clean of the places he had been. I would sit on the edge of the bed, staring at the clock, listening to the pipes groan, and feel my chest tighten with a mix of rage and helplessness. It wasn't just the condoms anymore, it was the steady stream of lies wrapped in silence, and I felt myself drowning in them. At first I fought with myself, clinging desperately to some scrap of hope, whispering that maybe I was wrong, maybe I had misunderstood. I told myself those condoms could have been old, leftovers from before we married, even though I knew in my gut that was impossible. I reminded myself that sometimes people work late, that sometimes they laugh at something funny online, that sometimes the smell of perfume could just be a coincidence. But denial is a fragile blanket, and mine tore a little more each day. His phone became an extension of his body, glued to his hand, tucked under his pillow, carried into the bathroom like it was too precious to leave behind. He laughed at messages I couldn't see, laughter that once filled our kitchen now locked behind a glowing screen. At dinner, he barely looked up, scrolling between bites, grinning at something that clearly wasn't me. That grin cut deeper than any insult ever could. He didn't even bother hiding his distraction anymore. And when I asked, gently, carefully, who he was texting, he rolled his eyes and called me sensitive, the same word he had used 100 times before, the same word that turned me from a wife with questions into a silly girl not worth listening to. And then came the little cuts, the small ways he chipped at me until I was raw. He criticized how I folded the laundry, as if the creases in his shirts mattered more than my aching chest. He mocked the way I brewed coffee, saying it was too strong, too weak, never just right. He hinted that maybe I should stop keeping busy and find a real job, as if managing our home, cooking, budgeting, and making sure his life ran smoothly was nothing but wasted time. It was as though the further he drifted from me, the more determined he was to make me feel worthless, like shrinking me could somehow justify his betrayal. And I let it happen, not because I believed him anymore, but because I was saving my strength. I realized he wanted me small, quiet, and ashamed, because small people don't fight back. But I wasn't small, not anymore. I was holding a secret heavier than any of his insults, a secret tucked away like ammunition waiting for the right moment to fire. The worst night was the lasagna night. I had spent hours cooking, layering pasta and cheese, using the last of the expensive mozzarella I had bought on sale, stretching our tight budget just to make something special. I wanted to remind him of us, of the home we had built, of the simple comfort of sharing a meal together. He came home late, barely glanced at the steaming dish on the table, and muttered that he wasn't hungry. He tossed his keys, loosened his tie, and collapsed on the couch, with his phone lighting up his face. I sat there with a plate in front of me, the food turning cold, my appetite gone, while he smirked at whatever secret conversation was glowing in his palm. My throat tightened, tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of him. I forced myself to eat bite by bite, tasting only bitterness. He didn't even look up, didn't see the way my hands shook as I cut into the food I had made with love. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I realized that the man sitting on that couch wasn't my husband anymore. Not really. He was a stranger, wearing his face. And if I broke down now, if I demanded answers, he would laugh, dismiss me, call me sensitive again, and leave me with nothing but humiliation. I couldn't give him that victory. Not now, not ever again. Life with him became unbearable, like sharing a roof with someone who was already gone. The weight of the lies pressed down on me until I felt my chest would burst, and yet I kept silent. Because silence was no longer weakness, it was strategy. I understood now that if I wanted the truth, I couldn't ask for it. I had to take it. I had to be smarter than the woman he thought I was, the woman he had dismissed and underestimated. Every careless mistake he made, the perfume, the late nights, the smug grin at messages he tried to hide, only fueled me. He was building his lies brick by brick, but what he didn't know was that I was already digging tunnels underneath, waiting for the moment his whole structure would collapse. The night the idea came to me, I was doing something stupidly ordinary, chopping peppers for a simple salad, and that ordinariness made the idea hit like a thrown stone. The peppers were bright, angry little things, the kind that make your eyes water if you forget to wash your hands. My grandma used to say, the kitchen remembers everything, like memories hide in the salt shaker and the wooden spoon, and I used to roll my eyes at that. But standing there with the seeds spilling across the board, the smell sharp and real, I felt a tiny click inside my head. I saw those 5 condoms again, tucked away in the car pocket as if they were casual things, and suddenly the peppers and the rubber belonged together in my mind. It felt almost absurd, ridiculous even, but it also felt right in a way nothing had felt since the day I first married him. The thought came soft and steady. Pepper, heat, a sting that would be impossible to ignore. It was not pretty, and it was not kind, but it was an answer that didn't need a confession. It would be proof that could not be laughed off. I didn't jump up and shove the plan into motion that night. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table and let the idea turn over in my head like a coin. I pictured Mark's face, the way he smirked at something on his phone, the way his eyes avoided mine when I asked about plans. I imagined how he would react if something small and sharp betrayed him in a private moment, not a public shame, not a scream, just a sudden raw human reaction that would leave him scrambling and exposed. I played the scene over and over quietly, the way you rehearse a speech in the bathroom mirror. Then I checked myself for the things that might make me feel guilty. Was I being cruel? Was I stooping to a level that would haunt me later? The truth was ugly and honest. Staying gentle and trusting had not worked. He had been gentle to everyone else but me. He had been careless with my heart. I thought of all the women who keep smiling through small betrayals because they are taught to be nice, to keep the peace, to hold the family together. I thought of my mother putting casserole after casserole on our porch when life fell apart for someone she loved. I thought of aunties who fixed dresses with a whisper and never asked for thanks. Those memories hardened into resolve. This was not about cruelty. It was about saying stop, loudly enough that he could not ignore it. After I decided the idea wasn't madness, I began to plan like someone making a careful grocery list. I pictured the exact moves, retrieve the condoms while he was at work, handle them with steady hands, put the pepper where it would be sure to be noticed only when they were used. I thought about timing, not too early, not too late, and the importance of making sure nothing looked tampered with except for what would truly matter. I imagined slipping on gloves so my fingerprints would not be there, cleaning up crumbs and traces like the woman I had been taught to be, the neat one who leaves no mess behind. I pictured myself walking to the car with a calm face because drama would spook him into hiding or disposing of things, and I needed him to believe ignorance still lived in me. I rehearsed breathing exercises I'd seen in an online video for people who had to speak under pressure, because keeping my voice steady later would matter more than any raised hand. I made a list in my head of small alibis, errands to run, calls to return, that would cover the minutes I needed in the garage. I even smiled to myself at how theatrical it felt, like setting the stage for a scene in a play. There was humor in the absurdity. There was power in the quiet precision. The night I actually did it, I felt strangely calm, like someone who was finally doing what should have been done months ago. Mark was at a late meeting he'd told me about, the kind of meeting he always seemed to have when he was actually out somewhere else, and I told myself not to rush. I put on thin gloves because fingerprints always make you feel amateur, and I grabbed a small container of crushed red pepper from the pantry, the kind I used to sprinkle on pizza when friends came by. I thought about slipping the condoms out one by one, feeling ridiculous and furious at the same time, and rubbing each wrapper with a tiny dusting of pepper. Careful so the wrappers didn't tear, but sure enough that if someone used them, the sting would be immediate and undeniable. I couldn't help a tiny private laugh at the absurdity of setting pepper on something so ridiculous, and then the laugh turned into a steady, cold focus. After each one, I put the condom back exactly where it had been, as if nothing had happened. I wiped the pocket with a clean napkin and folded it back over so there would be no sign. I left no note, no threat, no vengeance spelled out in big letters. I left only the possibility of truth arriving like a hot, unavoidable surprise. As I closed the car and walked back to the house, my knees felt both weak and strangely strong. I had crossed something I never thought I would cross, and in doing so I felt parts of myself rearrange, fear stepping back, a new kind of spine taking its place. After I did it once, after I dusted those 5 little wrappers with pepper and tucked them back into their hiding place, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread, like someone who has locked a door and then realizes they left the key inside. The immediate rush was oddly calming. Doing something, anything, felt better than the slow ache of waiting. But then the practical fear crept in. What if I was wrong? What if those condoms were innocent, left over from a forgotten panic, and I had just turned myself into a conspirator? The doubt sat heavy in my stomach until I forced it down with a long list of reasons why I had to follow through. I told myself I wasn't out for cruelty, I was out for truth. I needed evidence that he couldn't charm his way out of. So I made spreadsheets in my head, tiny checkboxes of things to document, dates he wasn't home, calls he couldn't explain, small purchases that didn't add up. I photographed receipts, I saved text messages that seemed vague, and I started a notebook I kept hidden in the bottom drawer where I stored nothing but stories of ordinary life. This notebook became my ledger of suspicion and my map back to myself, a map I intended to follow until I found the truth. Preparation had to be neat because mess would give him reason to dismiss me. I became meticulous in ways that felt almost soothing. I washed my hands more often, wiped my fingerprints clean after touching the steering wheel, and learned the habit of walking a little slower into rooms so my face didn't betray me. I pretended to be the same cheerful wife who hummed while folding laundry, but inside I cultivated a cold, steady patience. I practiced casual questions that sounded like curiosity and not accusation, asking about his day, the usual small talk of a couple who still lived on the surface together. Each time he dodged or lied, I didn't react. I marked it down. I learned his little tells, the way he adjusted his watch when he was nervous, the tiny clearance in his laugh when a message arrived that mattered more than me. Those tells became my secret language. The more ordinary and controlled I was, the more reckless he became, because people who think they can hide things often loosen their grip on caution. I also had to prepare for the practical fallout. If this worked, there would be consequences, and I needed to be ready. I quietly moved some of my savings into an account he didn't know about, the kind of small, secure thing you set up with cash you've been saving in the background. I texted Denise once, vague and safe, telling her to check in on me that week, nothing more than a lifeline in case I needed a friend who would not ask questions. I updated my resume a little, not because I wanted to leave now, but because a plan that could stand had options. I even reached out to a lawyer's office without specifics, the kind of call you make to know that help exists, should you need it. It was strangely empowering to build exits while staying in the house. It was like building a raft while still sitting on the dock. I also thought about the people around him, colleagues, clients, a boss who liked neat reputations. Public exposure would sting more than a quiet confrontation, and I didn't want to shove him into a corner where he could charm his way out. If truth came, it had to land where he could not spin it into a story that made me look small. Finally, the hardest part was the waiting. After all the lists, all the quiet rehearsals, there was nothing left to do but live and watch. Waiting stretched the days like taffy, sticky and slow, and every small sign became a signal. I found myself noticing the timing of his texts, the names that popped up on his screen for a millisecond, the way he tucked his phone under his thigh when I walked into a room. I kept the pepper plan private, a small coiled thing in my chest that made me feel dangerous and oddly alive. There were nights I lay awake thinking of what would happen if he never used them, if he threw them away, or if someone else found them first. There were mornings when I wanted to confess everything, to dump the notebook and the plan out on the kitchen table and watch him fumble for excuses. But then I thought of the lasagna, of the quiet ways he had chipped away at me, and I closed my eyes and breathed through it. In those long waits, I found something I hadn't known I possessed, a patient hardness, like river rock shaped by steady water, smooth on the outside but strong through and through. Waiting is its own kind of torture. Once the plan was set, there was nothing left for me to do but act normal and let time crawl forward. Every morning felt heavy, every evening stretched into eternity. I would watch him leave for work with his briefcase and his phone glued to his hand, and I'd wonder if today would be the day. My stomach would twist when he smiled at a text I couldn't see, when he checked his reflection twice before walking out the door, when he came home smelling faintly of cologne he never used for me. Even ordinary things, the sound of his keys dropping on the counter, the clink of ice in a glass, felt charged with tension. It was like living next to a loaded gun, knowing it would go off, but not knowing when. To keep myself steady, I forced routine. I cleaned the house more than usual, folded laundry with precision, and even baked pies I didn't eat, just to feel in control of something. There was comfort in order, in the way flour dusted across the counter, in the way fresh sheets snapped on the line, but under that surface calm, I was a storm. At night, I lay in bed pretending to sleep, listening to him breathe, his phone buzzing faintly on the nightstand. Sometimes he would get up, slip quietly into the bathroom, and stay there too long. My heart would pound, wondering if my secret plan had already begun its work. I would imagine him fumbling, cursing under his breath, and I'd smile into the dark, a private smile that felt dangerous and new. What surprised me most was how invisible my power became. He thought I was shrinking, thought my silence meant weakness, but the truth was that my silence was sharper than any question I could ask. Every time he ignored me, every time he dismissed me, he was feeding my resolve. He thought he was winning, and I let him think that. I played my role with care, asking harmless questions, offering dinner, folding shirts, nodding at stories I didn't believe, and in that role, I grew stronger. I wasn't the girl begging for scraps of attention anymore. I was the woman who knew something he didn't, the woman who had set a trap he couldn't see. That secret knowledge pulsed through me like a second heartbeat, steadying me in moments when I thought I'd break. And yet, The waiting was heavy. There were mornings when I doubted myself, wondering if he would ever use them, if my plan would dissolve into nothing but nerves. There were moments when guilt tried to whisper, asking if I had gone too far, if this was revenge and not justice. But then I would remember the lasagna night, the forgotten birthdays, the stolen money I hadn't fully uncovered but could already sense like a shadow. I reminded myself that this wasn't just about condoms or even betrayal. It was about reclaiming my own ground. My silence wasn't surrender, it was the sharpened pause before the strike. The truth didn't fall on me all at once. It slid in like cold water, inch by inch, until I was shivering from the inside out. He had left his tablet on the nightstand one afternoon while he showered, the steam curling under the door. Normally he kept it locked, hidden or glued to his side, but that day it sat there glowing faintly, almost daring me. My fingers hovered above it, trembling, not sure if I was brave enough to open the door to what I already suspected. When I finally swiped the screen, I told myself I was ready, but nothing could have prepared me. His messages unfolded like a book written in betrayal. There were threads with a woman I didn't know, but soon her name hit me like a slap. She was connected to his boss, someone I had seen once at a company dinner. They weren't talking about work. They were talking about hotels, drinks, meetings in places where I was never invited. The casual cruelty was what stunned me most. The way he described me as fragile, dull, someone who didn't understand him. It was as if I wasn't a wife anymore, but a prop he used to excuse himself to others. Then came the receipts. At first they looked ordinary, charges to restaurants, boutique shops, ride services, but the more I scrolled, the more I saw patterns, transactions labeled consulting and supplies piled up, and each one tugged at my chest because I recognized the account numbers. They weren't his funds. They were mine. My careful savings, the money I had built from small jobs, side gigs, and thrifted sacrifices, were being siphoned into his second life. A bracelet I once considered splurging on for myself glittered on another woman's wrist in a picture he had saved, her smile wide as she raised a glass at a place I had never been. My vacations, my future plans, my comfort were all sitting pretty on her Instagram feed while I sat home eating leftovers and clipping coupons. It wasn't just infidelity anymore, it was theft. He had stolen from me with the same ease he had stolen my trust, and he wore both thefts like a badge of entitlement. And it wasn't only her. The deeper I dug, the more women appeared like ghosts in the machine. Short messages, broken threads, half-written apologies that reeked of the same pattern. Him pressing, them hesitating, him smoothing it over with charm. He wasn't a man who had slipped once. He was a man who had built a hobby out of hunting for attention, using money that wasn't his, weaving excuses that made women feel guilty for even questioning him. One message was to a coworker who had pulled back after he crossed a line, another to a woman I didn't know, her words shaky with fear as she told him to stop texting her. He had blurred the lines everywhere, leaving behind a trail of small, broken pieces of trust that he hoped no one would ever put together. Reading those words, I felt my stomach turn, because suddenly I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was part of a long chain of women who had been treated like disposable ornaments, women who had been silenced by his excuses and his smirk. When I finally set the tablet down, I was shaking so hard I had to press my hands flat against the nightstand to steady myself. My chest felt tight, but my mind was sharper than ever. The pepper plan had been clever, yes, but it was only a spark. Now I had a fire in my hands. Proof not just of betrayal, but of a man who had been using people like stepping stones, climbing on backs that didn't belong to him. I thought about the way he had looked at me the night before, twitchy and irritated, and I realized it wasn't just guilt he was hiding. It was panic. He knew something had slipped, and he was scrambling to cover it. But he had no idea I had already seen it all, every receipt, every message, every cruel word. He thought he still held the power, but he was standing on quicksand. As I closed the drawer where I slid the tablet back, I felt calm for the first time in months, because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every woman he had ever lied to, stolen from, or made small. And now, I wasn't going to keep his secrets. I was going to turn them into his ruin. Once the truth was laid bare in front of me, I knew silence alone wouldn't be enough. I had to move carefully, like a chess player setting each piece before the final strike. So I began collecting everything, not just the tablet screenshots, but bank statements, receipts, and even photos of his car parked where it didn't belong. I opened a secret folder on my own laptop and saved every bit of evidence like puzzle pieces, labeling dates and times with the precision of someone who had been underestimated for too long. At night, while he scrolled through his phone thinking I was too distracted to notice, I quietly copied numbers from bills and compared them with transactions. His consulting fees matched dinners, hotel rooms, and jewelry receipts. I started printing copies at a library across town, so nothing was saved on our printer at home. Each page I stacked into an envelope felt like armor, like I was finally stitching together protection after months of being left bare. But collecting proof wasn't enough. I needed to think about timing. Exposing him in private would only lead to another storm of excuses, another round of him calling me sensitive or dramatic. I wanted it out in the open, undeniable, where his charm couldn't smooth over the edges. His company's charity gala was approaching, a big event where reputations mattered more than anything. I circled the date on my calendar and told myself that if I was going to deliver the truth, that was the stage it needed. Everyone who believed in his polished image would be there. His boss, his co-workers, even some of the people he'd bragged about impressing. I knew the humiliation would sting deeper in public, where he couldn't rewrite the story. For once, the spotlight would not protect him. It would burn him. I also began setting up small safeguards for myself. I moved money into an account only I could access, the one I had been quietly growing from odd jobs and birthday gifts over the years. I met with a lawyer, careful with my words, presenting only enough to get advice without tipping my hand too early. He told me what documents I would need, what steps to take if things got ugly, and I left his office with a folder that felt like a shield. I even reached out, anonymously, to someone in HR at Mark's company, sending a carefully worded email that hinted at inappropriate expenses and abuse of power. I knew it would plant a seed, and seeds have a way of growing fast when the soil is already rotten. The thought made me smile for the first time in weeks, not a happy smile, but a strong one. The hardest part was acting normal around Mark while all of this moved quietly in the background. I still cooked, still cleaned, still folded his shirts with neat lines, but now every action was a mask I wore. He thought he was safe in my silence, that I was still too weak to fight back. But I was no longer the woman he thought I was. Every time he smirked at his phone or brushed off my questions, I reminded myself that soon he would stand in a room full of people with nowhere left to hide. And I would be ready, because power isn't always loud, it isn't always violent. Sometimes it's patient, it's steady, it's the quiet woman at the dinner table smiling while she sharpens her knife under the napkin. The gala was the kind of event that people planned their outfits for months in advance, a glittering show where reputations were polished like the silverware on the tables. I had chosen my dress deliberately, navy blue, soft fabric that hugged just enough but not too much, paired with pearl earrings my mother had given me. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just the perfect picture of a supportive young wife who knew her place. Mark, of course, was the opposite. He preened in front of the mirror like a peacock, adjusting his tie 3 times, running gel through his hair, until not a strand dared to rebel. He had no idea that the real rebellion was standing right next to him, calm and smiling. As we entered the ballroom, chandeliers sparkled overhead like captive stars, violins played softly in the background, and waiters floated around with trays of champagne. It was the sort of scene people dreamed about. But for me, it was simply the stage I had been waiting for. Mark moved through the room as though it belonged to him. He shook hands, told jokes, introduced me with that well-rehearsed grin, the one that used to melt me but now just made me want to roll my eyes. Colleagues clapped him on the back, praising his hard work, his dedication, his loyalty. Oh, the irony. I smiled politely at every word, sipping my champagne, as if I hadn't been the one to hand over the very documents that would detonate under his feet before the night was over. People saw me as the quiet, doting wife, nodding along as if I were proud. In a way, I was proud, not of him, but of myself, of the patience it had taken to stand here and watch the show knowing exactly how it would end. The shift began subtly. His boss appeared first, a tall man with a face carved from stone and an expression that rarely cracked. He placed a heavy hand on Mark's shoulder and drew him aside, speaking low but sharp, the kind of tone that didn't need to be loud to slice through marble. I watched Mark's face, the practiced smile falter, the eyes widen just slightly, the jaw tighten. He nodded too fast, stammered, adjusted his tie again as if fabric could protect him from the truth. Around us, whispers started to move like wind through tall grass. At first, they were nothing more than a faint rustle, a raised brow here, a curious glance there, but soon they grew louder, spreading across the ballroom. I heard words float through the air like arrows. Funds, inappropriate, affair. His colleagues exchanged looks, their wives leaned closer, and every murmur was another thread unraveling his neat facade. The moment that sealed it came when she arrived. The woman connected to his boss. She had dressed to impress, dripping in gold jewelry that I instantly recognized from one of those receipts I had photographed, the kind labeled as consulting. But her face wasn't glowing now. It was twisted with anger, her eyes flashing as she leaned close to her husband, whispering furiously. His face reddened, and I knew at once that Mark had not only cheated on me, but had humiliated the wrong man, the kind who didn't forgive betrayal or embarrassment. The air thickened with tension, the kind that even the violins couldn't smooth over. The chatter grew, clinking glasses turned into sudden pauses, and I saw heads turning toward us as though we were the evening's true entertainment. Mark came back to me pale, sweat shining on his temple despite the cool air conditioning. His hand shook as he grabbed a drink from a waiter's tray, spilling a few drops on his cuff, and for once he didn't have a quip or an easy grin to cover it. He tried small talk with the couple nearest us, fumbling for words that wouldn't come, his laugh high-pitched and thin. He looked around the room like a man searching for an exit that didn't exist, and then his eyes landed on me. For one fleeting second I saw something raw in them, desperation, maybe even a plea. He wanted me to save him, to be the gentle wife who would smooth over his rough edges, who would stand by his side and smile while he lied. He wanted me to rescue him the way I always had before, but I didn't. I stood there steady, my champagne glass cool in my hand, my smile polite but empty. I let the silence stretch, let him see that the woman he had dismissed as sensitive, fragile, unimportant, was no longer his shield. Around us, the whispers had become waves, and his carefully built image was breaking apart piece by piece. His boss's cold stare, his lover's furious glare, the curious eyes of colleagues who once praised him, all of it pressed down on him at once. And I, the quiet one, was the only person in the room who knew the full scope of his lies. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the abandoned one. I felt like the one holding the strings, the one who had set the stage and watched the curtain fall. And oh, how sweet that fall was. Leaving the gala felt like stepping out of a long, suffocating tunnel into clear air. For months I had carried the weight of suspicion, of quiet humiliation, of waiting for the ground to give way beneath me. That night, as we walked into the parking lot under the glow of streetlights, I realized it was no longer my ground that was crumbling. It was his. Mark shuffled behind me, his shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before, his swagger gone, his tie loosened and crooked, his polished shoes dragging like lead weights. He muttered my name once, his voice hoarse, as if he wanted to demand an explanation, or perhaps beg for one. I turned, met his eyes with a calm I didn't know I possessed, and said nothing. That silence knocked the words right out of his mouth. For years he had silenced me with that word, sensitive. But now I was the one holding the silence, and it was heavier than any insult. In the days that followed, the unraveling accelerated. HR moved fast once my evidence landed in their hands, and suddenly colleagues who had once laughed at his jokes began stepping forward with their own complaints. The story spread quickly: misuse of funds, inappropriate relationships, deception that touched more than just me. His promotion vanished overnight. The car he loved so dearly, the one he flaunted like a trophy, was repossessed once the company traced the payments back to false expense reports. He spent hours pacing our living room, running his hands through his hair, trying to spin new lies even when there was no one left to believe them. At home, his tone shifted constantly, swinging from rage to pleading, as though he couldn't decide which would break me. One moment he slammed his fist on the counter, demanding loyalty. The next he fell to his knees, swearing he would change. But none of it mattered anymore. His words no longer had hooks in me. I heard them and felt nothing but clarity. I wasn't listening to a husband anymore. I was watching a desperate man grasp at smoke. Meanwhile, I was building something steadier. I met with my lawyer again, folder of evidence in hand, and watched the way his eyebrows lifted as he flipped through the pages I had collected so carefully. He told me I had more than enough to walk away with my savings intact, to protect myself, to cut every tie cleanly. I closed our joint accounts without hesitation, redirecting bills into my own name. I gathered my belongings methodically, folding each shirt and placing each picture frame into boxes with hands that didn't shake. I wasn't the woman begging for attention anymore. I was the woman reclaiming my space. When I finally handed Mark the divorce papers, I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't explain. I set them down on the kitchen table, the same table where he once ignored the dinner I made with love, and looked him straight in the eye. He stared at the papers as if they were written in a language he couldn't understand. His face drained of color, his lips parted, but no words came. In that silence, I felt my spine straighten, and I knew the reversal was complete. Even the world around us seemed to notice the shift. Neighbors who once saw me slouch under the weight of groceries now caught me walking taller, keys jingling in my hand as I moved freely. Some asked gentle questions, wondering if everything was all right, and I just smiled, telling them I was starting fresh. At the grocery store, the cashier who had once watched me pay in exact change now saw me swipe my own card from an account he could no longer touch. Friends who had drifted away during the lonely months reappeared, drawn back not by pity, but by the quiet strength they saw in me. And Mark? He was left alone with the ruins he had built for himself, stripped of the respect he craved, the comfort he stole, and the woman he had taken for granted. For years, he had painted me as fragile, unimportant, disposable. But the truth was standing right in front of him. I was not fragile. I was forged. I had been pressed down, chipped at, belittled, and I had risen higher than he ever imagined I could. That was the real reversal. His fall, yes, but more importantly, my rise. Starting over was slower and more tender than I imagined, but every small step felt like stitching myself back together. My new apartment wasn't big or fancy, but the sunlight poured across the wooden floor every morning like a blessing. I bought a second-hand couch, a table with only 2 chairs, and a set of dishes that were mine alone. At night, instead of lying awake next to a stranger's silence, I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the whistle of the kettle, the calm rhythm of my own breathing. I began filling the walls with photographs of places I wanted to see, not places he chose. I unpacked books I had abandoned, and I let myself laugh out loud at silly sitcom reruns without worrying someone would roll their eyes at me. On Saturdays, I baked just for myself, filling the air with cinnamon, sugar, and the comfort of knowing I didn't have to serve anyone but me. Freedom didn't arrive like fireworks. It arrived like warm tea in my hands on a quiet evening, steady and soothing. Mark's fall, on the other hand, was loud enough to echo. After the gala, people distanced themselves faster than I thought possible. His colleagues, who once praised him as ambitious and reliable, suddenly avoided his calls, leaving his messages unread. His boss, furious about the scandal and the personal betrayal, stripped him of responsibilities until he was nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the office halls. Even his so-called friends, the ones who had laughed with him over beers, stopped inviting him out, afraid that his name would tarnish theirs. The women he had used and discarded were no longer silent. A few spoke openly, and once one story was told, others followed. Suddenly, his charm wasn't charm anymore. It was manipulation laid bare, a trick everyone could now see through. The man who once walked into rooms like he owned them, now crossed the grocery store with his head down, clutching a basket instead of a cart because he had no one to shop for anymore. I didn't gloat, though I would be lying if I said I didn't feel a sharp satisfaction in watching life hand him back what he had given me. My revenge hadn't been in screaming or throwing his belongings on the lawn. It had been in silence, in evidence, in patience. The pepper was just the spark, but the truth itself had been the real flame. He had lied, stolen, belittled, and betrayed, and in the end, he destroyed himself. The irony was almost too perfect. The man who once mocked me for being sensitive had been undone because I was sensitive enough to notice, patient enough to prepare, and strong enough to walk away without a backward glance. That was the victory. I hadn't become cruel like him. I had stayed myself, only sharper, stronger, no longer willing to be small. The freedom wasn't just in leaving him behind. It was in discovering that I was capable of carrying myself forward, even after the worst storm. The moral of my story is simple, but it's carved deep. Never mistake kindness for weakness. Never assume the woman who smiles quietly at your side will not one day stand taller without you. Love is not a stepping stone, and trust is not a tool to be stolen. Mark lost everything he valued, the car he adored, the career he bragged about, the image he clung to, because he built it all on lies. And I gained what he never gave me: dignity, independence, and peace. Today I live lighter, not because the world can't hurt me, but because I know I can survive whatever it throws my way. I am no longer the girl who sat at the table with cold lasagna and a broken heart. I am the woman who turned silence into strength, who let the truth burn brighter than his lies, and who walked away whole. And if anyone listening has ever felt small in their own home, hear me clearly. Your silence doesn't mean surrender. It can be the pause before your rise. And if you've been listening this far, I want to say thank you from my heart. Sharing a story like this isn't easy, but knowing you're out there makes it worth it. If this touched you, if you've ever felt even a little bit of what I went through, hit that like button. It tells me I'm not alone. Leave a comment, even just a few words, because I really do read them all. And every story you share helps build a community where none of us feel small anymore. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe. It's your support that keeps me brave enough to tell them.